Now it is getting on. Okay. Okay. Assalamu alaikum Kemalcan, hoş amedid.
Ve aleyküm selam Timurcan, hoş geldiniz.
Rahmet. Okay, so today the talks with the wise people. This is the second talk that I'm going to have.
Honored.
And first time in the first part, I invited a Uzbek Turkish scholar who was originally from Andijan, Ahad Andijan. He's a historian, but also he's a physician, a medical doctor, and politician, and a state minister that he served in Turkey. So he wrote a book about Emir Timur. That was
he presented me another book of him.
Yes,
Turkish
that's right.
Yeah,
that was first one, but this last one was in December 2009. It's 960 pages, and he shows the mistakes in both Turkish scholars, the Uzbek scholars, and Western scholars who wrote about Emir Timur. So, for example, he rejects TUSATBITIG Timuri. He said that's not a real book, not written by Timur or advised by Timur. So he says that cannot be used as a source. So, so I had an interview with him on June 19. So today, June 26, I am hosting a very important, famous Tajik scholar, historian, and also my dear friend, Kamolidin Abdullaev, but sometimes he says short Kamal Abdullaev. And let me first go over your website. Kamal Abdullaev has a website, and get the information, then I will go into questions. So today I will be talking with the Tajik scholar, historian, Kamal Abdullaev, about Bukhara, about approximately about 1900 to 1924 period, where the Jadidism, the Basmachi movement, and other activities were, and especially about Sadriddin Ayniy, who was one of the important figures in the Bukharan modern history. Later, he became the father of the Tajik literature and a very prominent person in the Tajik Republic. So we will get some information about him and about also his son, Kamal Ayniy, whom you met. And also one time I met with Kamal Ayniy in a conference. So let me first go to the website and get some information about you to our watchers. And then we will go into questions that we will discuss about, I said, Bukhara, Basmachi, Jadidism, the situation in Tajikistan, historiography in Tajikistan, etc. So let me now go to your webpage, and for that I will make a screen sharing. I will share a screen that everyone can see your website. So your website is, let me bring it back to your website. It was not clear here, Kamolidin Ayniy. All right, so this is the one. And now I go and make screen sharing. Yes, here is the one. Not that one, hold on. I bought the wrong one. Here, Kamolidin Ayniy, this is the one.
Kamal Khan.
Yes, okay. Do you see your website?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So this is, if you go to the Google, it is Kamal Khan So kamolkhon.com. So it's very simple, kamalkhan.com. So here we have, this one is in Russian, but we go to the CV in English. The English will come. So each time I have to check a new share for English. Kamolidin Ayniy. Yes, so this is English. Yes, so a CV in English. So his education from 1967 to 1972 was at the Tajik State University in Dushanbe. Between that date and then 1976-81 Academy of Sciences of the USSR, Institute of the History of the USSR in Moscow, postgraduate, and in 1983 Candidate of History awarded in Moscow. And yes. Then he was at the Yale University in 1999, and his experiences is in various universities in the US. 2003 to 2013 is the, here, okay, is at the Ohio State University, Columbus. And let me check my, YouTube. Let me see if I'm having a problem with YouTube. Yes, we are having it. Okay, so there's no problem with YouTube. So we have already gone. All right, 26. All right, very good. So we have it on it, but let me go to that. Sometime I have to use many other things. So here, I stopped the sharing and I have to go to make sure that everyone is watching the right thing. So I go to leave. Yes, all right. So everyone is seeing that one. Okay, very good. So let me go back to the room. Sorry, I am still a novice for the Zoom program, although I use in my classes at Michigan State University, but still I confuse things. So here I go. No, that's the wrong one. It's a new share. Yes. No.
The questions.
Okay. Here.
Okay.
Here, CV in English. All right. Okay, we are back to your CV in English. So I mentioned the Ohio University, and then he was in London, 2000-2001, coordinator of the Tajikistan Accord project in the conciliation resources. Then in 1999-2001, he was at the Center for Strategic Research under the President of Tajikistan in Dushanbe. Okay, here I will stop the, okay. I stopped the voice of the YouTube because it is doubles the voice. All right, so here I go to the Zoom room, back to the Zoom room. Yeah, okay, back to the Zoom room. All right, here's share. No, not that one. Okay, again. Each time I lose. Oh, here. Okay. So I go to CV. Now I go back to CV in English. All right. Okay, yes. So we are back.
Okay.
Then He was the head of the Department of Political Science at the Institute of Political Research in Dushanbe, 89 to 91. And then from 75 to 89, he was at the Institute of History, Tajikistan Academy of Sciences. So he has various international collaborations, consultancies, contracts, etc. So it is a very rich CV, I can tell you. So now I will stop that one. So anyone interested more on Kamol Abdullaev's CV and his works, his books, articles, this website is very useful. So I advise everyone to check that website. Now I will go to a very personal question, because you have a very interesting family life. You were born in 1950 in the village of Shulmak in Ghan, in Badakhshan, Pamir area. And since 62, you have been living in Dushanbe. When you are not, when you are in Tajikistan, of course, but you travel a lot. So I met you in Istanbul, and I also talked to you when you were in the United States several times. And your mother and father are from Kanibadam, an ancient silk city. And your father, Necmettin Abdullaev, was a very high-ranking official of the Communist Party of Tajikistan. But there were once false charges against him in 1963. You maybe mentioned that one also. But now, can you give me more information about your both mother, Fatima Khan, and your father, Necmettin, and why they supported you to become an independent scholar, not a Communist Party member? And also about your childhood and how you become a historian. So these are my personal questions before we start other questions. Yes.
Thank you for your introduction. Indeed, I was born in Gharm, it's 1950, but to the parents of the Kanibadam city, the origin, they come from Kanibadam city. It's western part of Fergana Valley, mostly Tajik populated areas. So that's why my roots is exactly in the western part of Fergana Valley, where Isfara, Konibadam, Orotepa, and Khujand is. So, but they moved to Dushanbe after they got married in 1939 to move to Dushanbe in 1940. Since that time, we lived all over the Tajikistan. We traveled all over the Tajikistan because as you mentioned, I was born in 1950 in Gharm. And then I grew up in Badakhshan, in Pamir, and also I lived for a short period of time in Khujand. But most of my life was here in Dushanbe city, the capital of that's why in Tajikistan, people always ask, where are you from? Like in Uzbekistan also, people always say, I'm from Khorazm, from Toshkent, from Samarkand and Bukhara. That's why also in Tajikistan, we also have this kind of custom to ask, where are you from? What city are you from? That's why for me, it was not easy to answer. Yes, my roots is in Fergana Valley, is city of Kanibadam, but also I am a guy from Badakhshan. I also from Gharm and so forth and so forth. That's why I have a rich background, and let's say, but certainly my cultural roots are in Kanibadam, even though I never lived there for more than one month. My father was indeed the Communist Party, one of the Communist Party leaders of Tajikistan. He worked with Babajan Gafurov, this historian and the leader of Communist Party of Tajikistan for some period of time. He headed 3 provinces of Tajikistan, the Badakhshan, Khujand or Linavad province, as well as Gharm province, and also several district community level. That's why he participated in the Great Patriotic War. He was fighting against, Germans during the World War II. And after he came from the war, he was telling me that I had a chance either to go to politics, to go with the Communist Party work, or go to academy to be, because he graduated with the chemistry diploma. But he said, I have chosen to go to Communist Party work, to be, Soviet, Communist Party leader, rather than going with academy. That's why he always wanted me, and he never insisted me to join the Communist Party. Said you would better go with the academic. That's why he always supported my desire to go to do my to be a scholar. And in general, if I look to previous generation of our family, I see that most of my grandfathers, all of them were mudarrises. All of them, they worked for madrasa. There were several madrasa in Kaibadam. That's why, from this viewpoint, I continue the traditional business of my grandfathers. They were mudarris. I am also a sort of mudarris. I'm some sort of senior lecturer, professor at the university. From this viewpoint, there was no, and I'm very grateful to my parents. And my father is my hero. He always supported me, and certainly this is because of them, mostly. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. So after this brief family history, now I would like to divide our talk into 3 periods. The first period will be your personal career as a historian in both Soviet period and also in the post-Soviet period, and focusing on your major areas of expertise. Here you can compare the main differences that you have experienced in the Soviet period and in the post-Soviet period that now you're living, and how these periods change your scholarships. And did you have any difficulties like concentrating on some issues during the Soviet period? And it will be really very useful for our listeners from around the world to learn about how a scholar is try to survive in the Soviet period.
Thank you. Sure. When we talk about Soviet period, sometimes many people see the Soviet period, especially in academy, as a period of total pressure and control. Nonetheless, there were always room for freedom. We always found a place where we can come together and talk a little bit. For example, when I started my career after the graduation from I graduated from Tajik National University, then I served 2 years at the Soviet Army, and then I came to Academy of Science, and Rahim Masov, academician, he advised me to do early Soviet period, especially Basmachi movement. But I knew that Basmachi movement very politically, very delicate issue. There was no too much freedom in studying Basmachi movement. I knew that very well. And I must tell you that in 1980, when I was starting my business in this, my study of Basmachis, I had a meeting with some people from let's say, those who control this issue. They say, do you know that Basmachi movement is a very delicate issue? I said, yes. And they say, do you know the people who sympathize with Basmachi movement and so forth? He wanted me to tell that who support the idea that Basmachi movement is liberation movement. That's why I knew that there was a sort of control of paramilitary of, some. And that is why, nonetheless, I have chosen a theme which was very specific. It was related mostly to methodology of history. That's why I have chosen the theme about newspapers of Soviet Turkestan, which existed from 1918 to 1922, these newspapers, how they reflected, how they can be used as historical source for those who are interested in study of Basmachi movement. So I talk about Basmachi, but not directly about Basmachi movement. I talk about historical sources that reflects this kind of methodology of history. And while studying methodology of history, I can read, I can express myself freely, because I do not go with the political assessment of this sort of kind of Basmachi. I see who were the authors of these, articles, and where they get information about Basmachi movement, which they published in the newspapers, what genre they use, and what kind of newspapers were, and which kind of newspapers are better as a source, which kind of no. Also, I was very interested in studying national newspapers of that period of time, because I'm Muslim, I am Central Asian. For me, it was very interesting. What was the local voice in this period?
Yes, very good. Yeah. Here, I like to ask you that how was the accesses to the publications outside of the USSR on Basmachis, like the scholar by Mirza Haid that he wrote extensively during the Soviet period, and his books about Basmachi. How was the people cannot access, but are there academicians at the academy had access to those kind of works outside of Soviet Union?
No, all these books were put in secret depositories.
I see.
We were not given chance to read them, and not to mention we didn't speak English, most of us. That's why there was no reason to study English, because all these books were closed. I know that some 2 or 3 academicians in Academy of Science, they were just given a chance to read, and there were special people who translated them, and they had a chance to read. But I heard about by Mirza Haid, Zeki Validi Togan, and during the Gorbachev period, during the Perestroika period, there was all these book depositories became open, so we had a chance to move there. Right. That's why, even though I had my English was very poor at that moment in the late 80s, but there was a intellectual motivation. I just was looking and looking and looking for this book and reading them, because we were thirsty for new anchors, for new vision of this problem. That is why there was a lot of interest was exactly during period of Gorbachev perestroika.
Gorbachev, yes. So that brought, before the Gorbachev period, I had also experience with that, because there was a Cold War between West and East, between the Western world and the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union. So the Western scholars were claiming that the most important problem in Soviet Union is the nationality question, and it is a problem they represent. But on the other side, the Soviet scholars have written books, articles against these Western scholars, claiming that we have solved the nationality question. So there is a peaceful nationality in Soviet Union. So there was a kind of two-way wars was going on. What was your, for example, personal experience with this kind of two different, because you must have read the articles and the books who claim that there is a peacefully solved the nationality question in the Soviet Union. How was that discussed among Tajik scholars, for example?
You know what? I was trying not to be politically biased. I was driven by the curiosity and by getting access to new knowledge. That is why I wasn't also attached to a particular political platform, which I didn't want to abandon and go to take another stance.
Yes.
So my interest was purely academic. And if there was some change of my vision of the subject and, of the theme, what you mentioned in particular, this is because new historical sources became available, new literature became available, and the overall political situation in Soviet Union and the finally collapse of the Soviet Union provided us, me in particular, with the new chances to widen our horizon, to change or refocus, or to bring some more knowledge in the subject you study. This kind of, purely academic motivation, intellectual motivation was more important than my political, platform. So I had no any solid political platform to abandon. For me, including the Basmachi or communists or Bolsheviks, they are not, there was no strings attached to them. For me, they were just the guys whom I study. I want to know more about the past. I want to, if you wish to continue my career as a scholar, to widen my heart, to please my, curiosity, and this kind of stuff. That's why the issue mentioned about nationality policy also, as I mentioned, I was not involved in direct this kind of class struggle with these, like Western scholars and so forth. I was just driven by curiosity, pure curiosity. That's why, rather than political, platform and so forth. Certainly, you are right, because especially during the Cold War era, in late Cold War era, a lot of interest was paid to Islam and nationality policy. And we read this, and we certainly for us it was very interesting to know what other people think about our history. Again, I wasn't angry. I wasn't, protective to protect, Soviet ideology. Right. I was just listening and looking and trying to move further, to widen, as I mentioned, my horizon, rather than to taking political platform. Certainly, I understood that both sides, they make some, from my viewpoint, sometimes they are not right, they are not correct. And also, I was very sad because most of them, not all, but most of them, they were just biased, with this Cold War, confrontation, which I didn't like from both sides. But again, for me, it was interesting to read them, even though I was disagree with the most of the Western scholars. Nonetheless, I read these papers, the books with interest, because it was good for me to be more.
Yes, very good. Yes. Well, it was during the Cold War time, so the world was going on. But there is one interesting thing behind you. I see a Suzani on the wall. Can you tell a story about this Suzani?
Yes, Suzani was produced by my grandmother, Adolat Khan. She was married a guy named Manon Khan. Manon Khan was Tureikh Kokand. He was from Kokand, and he was a very rich guy because he was Tura. Tura, probably Khan family, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
And I know that they have property, they had lands in Konibadam, they have land in Jizakh, even in Tashkent. And he was very rich. He was collecting taxes from Choryak Kor, they call it, from the guys who they rented their land, and he caught typhus. In 1921, he passed away. And Adolat Khan is my Oybuva, we call it. She was married, this Manon Khan, who passed away in 1921, exactly in the year when my mother was born. So my mother never seen him. And Adolat Khan, she produced this kind of weaved this, Suzani, and it was a gift, and I restored. So it's at least 100 years old.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that's very good.
Very specific ornament.
Yes. Very good, very good. So now I'm also interested in your teachers while you were studying, and there were very great historians in Tajikistan like Babajan Ghafurov and others. And have you had any connection with Babajan Ghafurov, and also Sadriddin Ayniy is another important figure, but when he died, you were only 4 years old. So, but you met his son, I think, Kamol Ayniy. So can you tell a little bit about the Babajan Ghafurov? Have you ever met with him, or you have read his books, of course, but and also Kamol Ayniy and some other teachers that had influence on you?
Okay, thank you. Certainly, my biggest teacher is the Dean of History Faculty or Department of History of Tajik National University, Babakhonov, Mansakhan Babakhonov. He was very good as a teacher, as a dean, and he invited the best Russian Soviet scholars to teach us from Moscow. That's why we had a very good school, which in this, my teachers were students of the pre-revolutionary Russian, like Bartol, the Bertels, and so forth. That's why this kind of tendency came to me sometimes. So I saw this. Andreev, Semyonov, these great, Orientalists, they lived in Russia, they lived in Stalinabad or Dushanbe, we call it today. And this kind of historical school of European, I would say German and Russian, with their interest in historical studies, in historical sources, and knowing languages. This kind of tradition, which came from Russian historiography, which also came previously from German, then to Russian, then to Soviet, and then came to Dushanbe. That's why in Dushanbe we had very good history, department at the Tajik National University, as well as we had very good Institute of History of Academy of Science, where I happened to work, and I was sent later to Moscow, and I was trying to reach Babajan Ghafurov, but it was not. He was very, very honored, very respected, and because he had connection with Stalin sometimes. Stalin, he worked with Stalin. That's why couple of times he visited. I wrote my dissertation. I was PhD student at the Institute of History of the Soviet Union of Academy of Science in Moscow. And once I saw him to come to one of the meetings. When he entered the hall, everybody stood up.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he was greeted. And I believe that I got the impression that people still saw him as somebody who was close to Stalin,
Oh,
At least I know that he was very influential, because he was, once he was the first secretary of the Communist Party of Tajikistan. He was working with my father, by the way. My father knew him very well. And then he moved to Moscow to be, and became director of the Institute of Oriental Studies. And he did a lot for this institute. He created the publishing house, Vostochная Literatura, in which, and he supported all these Russian Orientalists, and still Russian Orientalists say the Babajan Ghafurov is the best director of the Institute of Academy of Science of Oriental Studies. So he was very good as an administrator, as a politician, I would say. He has some vision, and he was also involved in conducting Eastern policy. And he was a member and headed a lot of, missions to India, to Eastern countries, as representing the success of Soviet nationality policy in the third world countries. He was exactly this. He was met with Jawaharlal Nehru, with all the leaders of the Eastern country, and representing that, this kind of. That's why certainly, and at the same time, he was a scholar. he wrote his book, Tarikh-i Mukhtasar Khalq-i Tajik, The Brief History of the Tajik People, in 1947. 1947, it was published. And he wrote it while he was the first secretary of Communist Party of Tajikistan. And as far as I know, while he was writing this book, he also was supported by Stalin, because it was very delicate issue, because the books was not titled Historia Tajikskaya SSR or History of Tajik Republic. It was titled
Republic, yes, always.
It wasn't. It was History of Tajik People,
People,
and in this book, he wrote the whole history of the Central Asia. That's why one of the objections, which was by Uzbek colleagues, they said, you write history of the whole region and call it history of Tajikistan. It was very delicate issue, and Stalin exactly supported this time. And that's why, the second book was published in 1972 by Babajan Gafur. Also, it wasn't history of Tajik people even. It was the Tajiks, Tajikon, Tajiki.
Oh, yes.
Again, if you read this book, the whole history of Central Asia called history of Tajiks,
Tajikistan, yes.
Yeah. This one. And certainly in this book, you know this very well, that people write books, and people use these books as a textbooks, and people go to school and read these textbooks, and while reading these textbooks, they start to think and according to content in this. That's why books, historical books, particularly books written by Babajan Gafurov, are very important information of Tajik identity, which also was exactly started, especially pre and post World War II period. It was very influential.
Yeah, very good. And how about Kamol Ayniy?
Kamol Ayniy, once I met him, and because during the Soviet time, he and his wife Muqaddama Ashrafi, who was a daughter of Mukhtar Ashrafi. Mukhtar Ashrafi is a great composer, both Uzbek and Tajik. He's from Samarkand, I believe. So Muqaddama Ashrafi, the wife of Kamol Ayniy, and Kamol Ayniy itself, they had the right to travel during the Soviet time. They were given the right to travel abroad, because Kamol Ayniy was a scholar, Orientalist, and Muqaddama Ashrafi, his wife, she was also an expert in miniature, Persian miniature.
Yes, miniatures.
That's why they were given right to go. Very few people were able to go
to the West,
during the Soviet time. But these two, this couple, Kamol Ayniy and Muqaddama Ashrafi, were given right. That's why when I started my travel, trips to West, and once Kamol Ayniy said that the manuscripts of writing by Ayniy are in Persian, Arabic script, and because he never wrote, he didn't write in Cyrillic. Everything was written in all script, and that's one. After that, people who were dealing with the publishing of his writings into Cyrillic, they changed it initially.
Yeah, that's right.
And he said, I have the original text with me. I have in my personal archive. And I would like to go and probably to, make presentation, because the manuscript written by Ayniy and the final text, which was published, was different, because there was some sort of involvement. This kind of things he told me. I don't know what happened later on with this archive, but he said that, I would probably, there is something. And he was very kind, And because Muqaddam Ashrafi, his wife, he is close to our family.
Yes,
And that's okay. We are relatives. You know that he used to tell me that we are relatives with him, certainly. And he was very, very smart, very kind, very.
Very good. So both of us has, I'm sorry, both of us have not met Ayniy because he passed away in 54. But I'm using his book a lot because he's the #1 primary work about the history of the Bukharan Republic and the Jadidism in Bukhara. So he is the scholar who has written first that book during the Bukharan Republic and published in 1922, and later publications came. And I think it was also translated into Tajik too. From Uzbek, but so he's my primary source. I use him for because he gives the most information about Aslan Hoja, my father, also in his book. So now I will ask you that since you have written this very important book from Xinjiang to Khorasan, giving the history of Central Asian immigration in the 20th century. It's a very good book with all, even you have my picture that we met in Istanbul in 2008. And so this, and also the cover page is very interesting because you gave all the historical persons' photographs here. Especially everyone, including Sadriddin Ayniy, my father, Atatürk, Enver Pasha, and the Basmachis, Alim Khan, everyone. So later we will come back to this topic of your book about the immigration of Central Asians during the last periods, the first early periods of the Soviet Union. But before that, I would like to ask you about, since you work on Basmachis a lot, and what you can say a few things about the Jadids in Bukhara, and briefly, if you like, but then mention the Basmachi movement, because that's one of the major area of your study, the Basmachi. So it is up to you. So you can start with Sadriddin Ayniy, his involvement in the Jadid period in Bukhara, and the establishment of the Bukharan Republic. But before that, of course, in 1918, we see a different wave of struggle starts in Central Asia, mostly in the southern parts of Central Asia, including Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan of today, and the Basmachi movement. And some scholars say that's the first guerrilla warfare in the 20th century in the world they regarded. So we will come to that, but can you say a few things about the Jadids in Bukhara and the establishment of the Bukhara Republic and Sadriddin Ayniy?
Yeah, it's probably the least studied, I believe, I think, this early period, the birth of nations, the birth of the states. For the why Bukhara?
Yes.
Why then Bukhara became Uzbekistan? Where did Tajikistan go? Because there was no even mentioning about Tajikistan. Tajikistan appeared later on. And also the issue, while we see that most of Bukharan rulers, members of Bukharan government, they were ethnically Tajiks. At least they were Persian speakers. At least for their first language was Persian. While Uzbekistan, where did Tajikistan go? This kind of issues are very important for understanding. Sometimes today, people in Tajikistan in particular see this issue from the today's position. They, for example, Masav, they said these guys betrayed the interests of Tajiks. They were not Tajiks. They're just the enemies of Tajik people. This kind of vision without going deeper at what exactly what make them, believe that they should go with Jadidism, why they should go with Turkey, with with all this kind, which today makes many in Tajikistan crazy, because we fail to see and to move exactly in this period of time. Because in this period of time, and also as a historian who was dealing with immigration, I also see that the issues which were, in the core of conflict in Central Asia in the early Soviet period, and issues which we have today.
Yes, that's right.
The same, this conflict between Kadimiya and Jadidiyya still we have. If you come, I don't know about Uzbekistan. If you come to Tajikistan, this issue about religiosity and ethnic nationalism, issues about reformism, issues about Islamic fundamentalism, the same issues which we have today, which become the reason of the civil war in Tajikistan in the 1990s, were also in the core on conflict of the disputes in Bukhara and that period of time as well. These issues became, they still are waiting for their, that's why I understand the Jadid's, interest in Turkey as Turkey for them was an example of successful, first of all, competition with European countries. And also at that period of time, in the early 20th century, the ideas of reformism and modernism were on the top of intellectuals.
Yes.
They say, okay, we should go with Western experience. We should not exactly go to West, to Christians. We have a Turkey who are Muslims, and they are very successful in moving, in this direction of modernism. They're very good at modernization. That's why, even though that's why their interest in Turkey was, at least how I understand, was pragmatic. It was a pragmatism. There was no, other exampple, because they had the example of Russia and Turkey. Certainly, Turkey was something which was close to them. Even though many of them, they were not ethnically Turks, but they spoke Turkic language. And they, shared this kind of ideas. We should go with this, we should go with reformism. But at the same time, they focus, the Jadid, they focus on education problems. They failed to make their ideas close to ordinary people. But ordinary people, they remained under control of these old-fashioned, mullahs. And old-fashioned mullahs, and the society, because Jadids were very thin, it's a very small group.
Small,
and most of the people, they saw the Jadids saying, okay, these guys are copying Western experience. They lack genuine originality. And they said, Islam is very good for us. We don't need reformism. We should be good Muslims. We don't need Western experience, because we are imitating somebody's experience. That's why they saw Jadids as a group of guys who wanted to move further to modernization, and they afraid that while following the Jadids, we can lose our originality.
Even they called
we can lose something.
Even they call Jadids kafir,
Sometimes. That's why. And still today we have this kind. Today we have this kind of issues. Many people, they are more traditionalist, I would say. They're less acceptive because they don't want to openly, they want to somehow to develop, That's why, this kind of issues still are important at that moment. That's why, and the Jadids, one of, because even today, the Jadids are not that popular, they are not that popular as a national heroes. More Soviet period is more popular in Tajikistan rather than, but in Tajikistan in particular, there is a lot of interest in Jadidism, but again, from the viewpoint that most of the Jadids, Munzim, Ayniy, and so forth, they were Tajiks. That's why the interest in Jadid is still there. And regarding the Basmachi movement, the same. This problem was the same. Also, the Basmachis, they how to put it. So when talking about Basmachi movement, certainly it wasn't movement, and the problem was that these intellectual, they lacked intellectual leadership.
Yes,
and
yes.
Even though Ahmad Validi Togan, some other leaders, including your father,
Yes, well,
they
yes.
wanted somehow to make a
Yes,
deal
yes.
to provide a sort of intellectual leadership for these guys. Said, no, you are Kafirs,
not
you
successful.
are Jadids, you called Russians, that's why we don't like you.
Yeah.
That's why there was a lack of intellectual leadership, and finally there was no national, solid, common, anti-Soviet, or let's call it national liberation movement as alternative, as a solid, formed, declared somehow, alternative to Soviet dispensation. So that's why, and when the Soviets started, the Basmachis was liquidated not by military measures only, but also the Soviet provided economic, opportunities, but also they provided the opportunities for cultural development. So cultural development it was in the core of Jadidi movement. That's why the Jadids, they said, instead of fighting the Soviet Red Army, let's go with the Soviet power, because Soviet power give us chance, to develop national literature. We had theater of drama, of ballet. We had the National Academy of Science formed. We had National University. All this kind of which pleased ambitions and of Jadids. Elites, Uzbek and Tajik elite. That's why I said, and exactly in this situation, the Basmachi become obstacles to national development. And that's why when we talk about Basmachi movement, we also have to admit that there was a sort of civil war. So it wasn't the war of the local population against the Red Army, even though it was sometimes. But in general, it was a struggle and war between the supporters of the Bolsheviks and supporters of the counter-revolutionary. Because a lot of Tajiks and Uzbeks supported Soviet power in this country. This was a civil war. This was a civil conflict. It's also easy to understand because as a Tajik, I can see also we had also civil war in 1990s. And if you ask me whether I support of Basmachi, I do not know, because I do not know whom I supported during this recent civil war, because I understand both of sides. I certainly my sympathy sometimes with this or that, but I don't want to talk a lot about this.
But your mentioning of this is very important, because you said that because of this Basmachi movement, more cultural freedom was given to Central Asia, especially intellectuals. But when the Soviets managed to destroy the Basmachi movement by 1934, then those intellectuals became a target.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's
this is another story. Yeah.
Yes,
but
another
again,
story. Yeah.
Was also it was
Yes.
so it wasn't part of national. It was part already Soviet history.
Yes. Yes.
You know, it wasn't policy directed against the Muslims of Central Asia, Tajikistan. It was a part of Soviet history, and also it was violence coming from some state. You know, people somehow.
That's the one.
Yeah, it wasn't like Basmachi, because Basmachi, as a civil war, is a chaos. You know, everything may happen. There is no order. There's it's different.
Yes. So now we came to your main topic of immigration out of Central Asia, and which coincides with the collectivization in the Soviet Union, the kolkhoz thing, the gulags, etc., and the hunger, which also a result of collectivization. So many Central Asians left, but during the collectivization and economic reasons, it is an economic migration. But before that, we know there was political immigration to several leaders left Soviet Union or the Central Asia, Bukhara and other parts because of political reason. So now we come to your main topic of immigration, which this book is excellently gives the history of it, the documentation. So what you can tell about this immigration?
Yeah, first of all, certainly I read, I believe it was a book by Benningsen, Alexander Benningsen.
Benningsen, yes.
He said, whether we can say that Tajikistan is the homeland of all Tajiks. Because he said that a lot of Tajiks lived abroad, in Afghanistan in particular.
Yes.
The same was, so there was some sort of late Soviet period interest of the keen people living on other side of the Soviet borders. Because during the Soviet time, everything was controlled. We were given, task to see Tajik history as a history limited by political borders of Tajikistan. The same with Uzbekistan. And forget about, those who, Osman Hojayev and so forth who left, they are different people. They have no relation to us. That's why, in late Soviet period, there was the overall interest of the people, keen people living outside of the countries. That's why, and also for me also, because I did study on Basmachism, I was interested what happened to Basmachi, because I read that Ibrahim Beg, he fled to Afghanistan. What happened to him?
Yes.
How he came back to 1931? What was going on in Afghanistan? Why Afghanistan? This kind of issues. Certainly, when you are given a chance to write your national history, you are not happy with this kind of state-centered approach. With a particular territory of Tajikistan, Soviet Socialist Republic, when you talk about Tajik, because as I mentioned, Babajan Ghafour exactly mentioned this kind of, he said, because he admitted that, okay, Tajikistan is very small, but if you look to Tajik history, it's Samarkand and Bukhara, but Samarkand, Bukhara is part of Uzbekistan. Does that mean that we should not write about Samarkand and Bukhara? This kind of paradoxes made us crazy. That's why there was an interest to go what was happening there, certainly we understood that there is a irredenta, people who always lived in, and also there was a diaspora which is a result of immigration. How many people did immigrate? So even though when I was working on Basmachi issue, certainly I mentioned, I read that most of people, they fled. A lot of people fled to Afghanistan. That's why, and also as I mentioned, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a chance to find new historical sources. When you see new historical sources, it makes you to change your, to write new books, let's say. That's why I was lucky. In Uzbekistan, there was a short period of time when there was openness. in the late Soviet period, they opened all the archives, and I was happy to get access to the investigatory case of Ibrahim Bek. Ibrahim Bek was captured by Chekaba and KVD in 1931. Then he was interrogated. All the protocols of him, all about his life in Afghanistan from 1927, 26 to 31 was there, you know, and I get access to this issue, to this document, you know. Certainly it was a good opportunity to read and to write something. And certainly, and also I was lucky because during my study at the postgraduate in Moscow, I studied a lot of Soviet archive. That's why I had the chance to, you know, combine the documents which was, you know, I found in Soviet archive with documents. That's why certainly, and also my Western colleagues also wrote about that. For example, Audrey Shalinsky and some other also from America, they wrote books about. Also, there was a lot of interest in Tajik and Uzbeks in Afghanistan because of the Soviet-Afghan War. Because the Soviet-Afghan War started, and people started asking what was going on, how they came to Afghanistan, and you know, about I read some books about by my Western colleagues about Uzbeks in Afghanistan, certainly. In Nazif Shahrani.
Oh yes, Shahrani, yes.
He wrote about this kind of book. So there were some writings in Eden Nabi from Harvard University.
Oh yes, Nabi. You know, Eden Nabi was my PhD colleague. Together we were with Edward always studying. So
they came with Richard Fry
later she married
to Dushanbe, and we met many times. So I consider Richard Fry one of my teacher, and Eden Nabi I met, and I talked about.
And she's interesting. She's an Assyrian from Iran. So that's also,
But now he lost interest in Central Asia. I don't know. But once he was very, very enthusiastic about it. That's why, you know, I was able to go and to write, you know, this, to make this study, you know, using new sources which became available in the early post-Soviet period. I mean, when the Soviet Union collapsed, I was the chance. Also, I had the chance to go to India Office Library at London. They have a very rich archive. Not too much in, you know, documents, but there are some documents of a British administration in India, in Afghanistan. They also they had the consulate in Kabul as well as in Delhi, and they monitored what's going on Central Asia, and some documents also became available. So I made this kind of study and came to conclusion that there was a two wave of migration. First wave, I would say it was refugee. Just people were afraid of the Red Army invasion and just quit. And this mostly, it was lasted from 1918, 1917 even, to 1926. And the second wave from 1926 to 1931, somehow, from this period of time. And many people fled to Afghanistan. Why Afghanistan? Because Afghanistan has a good border, but also people consider, because it was a Muslim, you know, immigration, they consider Afghanistan as the holy state, as the Islamic state, because it was ruled by Amanullah Khan. Amanullah Khan, as a ruler of Islamic State, he welcomed him, even though he afraid of the Soviet policy, but he provided shelter for many of them. I forget you.
Yes, very good. Okay, now I will ask you come to the another question, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were each republic has a different story. But in Tajikistan, we experienced a civil war. In Western scholarship, also many books were written about that. But as someone from Tajikistan, a historian from Tajikistan, I like your assessment about this, the causes of this conflict, internal conflict in Tajikistan, why it happened, only in Tajikistan, not in other Central Asian republic. There were other problems with Central Asia, but this was, it is an armed struggle between different regions. And so how you can assess this Tajik Civil War? What was the causes and how it was solved? Because that was also one of the main questions. International, there was collaboration to end it. I think Russia also had a role. So how you assess this, the causes of the Tajik conflict and how it was solved? And what is the situation right now? So what you can say about that one? And also one other question related to that, is that a conflict in Tajikistan helped the democratization in Tajikistan, or it was a negative effect? What do you think?
Yes, very important $1 million question, $1 million question. So certainly, some people, there's a lot of interest was invested and paid to what was going on. Why Tajikistan? Because if you look to the collapse of the Soviet Union, you can see two wars in Chechnya. But it's a little bit different. Within the, but among other republics, Tajikistan became.
Yes.
Certainly, as a historian, let's connect with the previous question. Certainly, one of the, certainly not main, but very important reason, that proximity to Afghanistan, Afghan border. Because if you had a urgency, you should to retreat somewhere in order to, to create some basis, to get some rest, to get some support. The same, but we are the closest country to Afghanistan, Pakistan, region. The most probably at that time, particularly, it was the most dangerous place in the world. That's why, and we had a 1,300 kilometer long border with Afghanistan. But Uzbekistan has only, I don't know, some 40 or 50 kilometers on the border. It's very well protected, by the way. I mean, Uzbek. By the Tajik border was very porous. So there was a chance again, as it was in 1920s during the Basmachi period, people just crossing the river, bringing weapon, bringing gold and so forth during the Basmachi times. The Basmachis, they raised money among the population, and they went to Pakistani border with Afghanistan to get some weapon to bring and fight against the Soviets. The same was also, there was always a chance to go. So the availability of the rare, which not well protected, is one of the reasons. Certainly it is external problem. External reason, I don't think it was more important, but the most important, certainly internal problems, internal issues, which were during, I don't want to go deep on what was going, how the power was built during the Soviet period of time. But again, there was a lack of coherence. There was a lack of Tajik nationalism, unified Tajik nationalism. Some regions of Tajikistan felt themselves deprived. They believe that they are not well presented, in the power, and they started this kind of, and that's why many people say probably this is the war of region. I believe it's not war region, because if the war between the regions, like in Yugoslavia, you can see this. Still, they separated, they divided from Yugoslavia. But now, if you come to Tajikistan, there is no conflict between regions. People live peacefully, be it north or south, and so forth. That's why it wasn't the war of region. It was the conflict between second echelon political entrepreneurs of district level, Communist Party mostly. They started to compete with each other. And while competing with each other for the central power, which was very weak, they secured local support in their regions, among their compatriots, let's say. the small homelands. For example, Kulabis, they went to Kulabi people, and the Kulabi started Gharmi. Political entrepreneurs went to Gharm to enlist some support the military. So this kind of, the conflict was between these political entrepreneurs of the Second National Communist Party, not between the regime themselves. Yes, they secured some local support through the, being compatriots, living personal connection. Sometimes probably religious also networks were involved. For example, like in Kavildara, in Gharm, they were religious people, and sometimes the Sufi leaders also supported. But again, Sufi leaders, they were not, because the Sufi, it's also neutral power. There were some Sufi leaders who said, don't fight, don't get involved. Some people indeed were, involved in this kind of. We cannot blame Sufis or Islamic leaders, religious leaders in inflaming or taking part of the war. But sometimes they were used because they were unable to secure they were able to enable the mechanism of social mobilization. Briefly put, they could just call people to fight. Yes, sometimes, but again, not all of them. Some of them say, don't go there. So this was conflict. This mostly, there were factions from the southern Tajikistan. Northern Tajikistan, including Fergana Valley, they were not involved directly in this conflict. And then what happened, the war was stopped by international intervention, peaceful initiatives. Because it happened that at that moment, in 1996, the Taliban came to power in Afghanistan. And while in 96, we have already a lot of refugees from Tajikistan living in Afghanistan, and everybody afraid that these guys can be part of the inter-Afghan war. And especially Iran. Iran also was not in good terms with the Taliban, and they didn't want Tajiks become part of the Taliban, and Russia as well. Russia also didn't want, this kind of conflict. So here we can see coincidence of Iran in Russia. All of them, while Iran has influence on Tajik opposition, while Russia, Moscow had influence on the current government, secular government, and they put pressure on the both of them, saying, stop the war, please.
Yeah.
Otherwise you would not support it by us. And finally, and because both Russia and Iran didn't like the Taliban, they didn't want the Taliban come to Central Asia, Iran, and so forth and so forth. That's why there was there was no major external players who were interested in Tajik war to continue. This was a very, and external forces were interested in bringing peace to Tajikistan.
So yes,
that's why they intervene. They intervene, saying let's, and it was in the spring of 1994. The situation was somehow precarious, even though the state government has some upper hand a little bit, but still opposition was strong. But at that moment, international forces say, please come. And also we had the peace process. We started, as I mentioned, in 1994 in the spring, and lasted to 1997. And many people were involved. It was UN, sponsored peace process, and very supportive. So the peace was signed in June, exactly tomorrow, 27th of June of 1997. We're gonna celebrate tomorrow this, day of peace.
Peace, yes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Today, so the peace was signed. So the war ended up with negotiated settlement. So it wasn't the victory and defeat.
Yes.
Because most of the civil war end with the total defeat of somebody.
Yes.
But
Yes.
in this very rare case, when we see negotiate a settlement, both sides, opposition, even though he was on the weaker side, but still there. Opposition,
Yes. Opposition,
let's call them Islamic opposition. And the secular. Certainly seculars, they were supported by Uzbekistan, Russia, they were a little bit more stronger, but these guys were still, and they also had some support from Afghanistan, not from Afghanistan, the state, but there was there was a chaos, in Afghanistan at that moment. There was a lot of various people coming, and there was a sort of, opportunities for them to have a base in Afghanistan and continue fighting against the Soviets. Against the government. So we concluded this kind of peace in 1997. Then from there was also, further was the process of consolidation of peace. So we we ended up our peace process in approximately 2003, 2005. From 2003 to 2005, we were already total, security.
Yes.
No, certainly the peace process was successful also because of the security for support. There was two options for peace process. One option, okay, guys, stop fighting. Let's create ideal society. Everyone will be given place at the table. Everyone would be given share in the power. Another approach is that to choose two strongest parties and please them, to ignore the third parties. And certainly in this approach, the second one, the interests of the third parties will be ignored. It's not ideal peace. The same was in Tajikistan. So we had to power the governmental, side and the opposition, while, for example, people from the northern Tajikistan were not given chance to take part in the peace process. Not to mention Russians, not to mention Uzbeks as only two these warring factions who had the weapon they were somehow this kind of peace led to so-called negative peace. So the absence of the open warfare. But the conflict was not solved completely. Because many people were ignored. But the most important thing is people stopped fighting. There was
that's important.
There was the war was stopped. That's why this was very narrow, probably not very just, not very sufficient from the viewpoint of the liberal ideas, but very practical, very pragmatic peace was achieved. And the international guys, the international forces, the rest is on you guys. You decide.
Yes.
And the second part, unfortunately, was not solved. I don't want to.
Yes, we hope so. It will be in the future more. So my last question will be about Central Asia. Actually, as a historian, how do you view this region? Because it is a landlocked region. One side is China, a big, strong state. Other side is Russia, long borders with Russia, all the entire Central Asia, the Western Turkestan, actually, the Western Central Asia. On the one hand, there is China. On the north and western side is the Russia. And in the south, there is India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan and Iran. Iran and Afghanistan. And so we have this surrounded Central Asia. That's why it is always called the landlocked region. So how do you see, as a historian, the future of this area, how this area, now there are 5 independent republics in this Central Asia. How do you see these 5 republics can survive against these big states, China, Russia, and in the south, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran? So what do you think will be ideal for these 5 republics concerning economic, cultural, and political, not military, but political union. What do you think? With union, I don't mean as a kind of like European Union, but there is more integration between them, because time to time we experienced the relations was not so good between the republics, especially depending on the leaders, this leader and that leader. But now we see that Islam Karimov was replaced with a new president, and he's having some good relations with Tajikistan. So as a historian, what do you say the future of Central Asia, which direction this region will evolve in the world?
Yeah, you started your question with mentioning that Central Asia is surrounded by powers which are much greater and stronger than Central Asia. So this kind of vision always was there, that independence indeed is a daydream, you know, because you are very small, you are very weak. To be independent, you will be, you know, somehow, you know, captured, swallowed by the neighbors. But it didn't happen. Even weak Tajikistan is very, very independent to some extent, you know, in many cases. At least in international affairs, they are playing. They can, all the central Tajikistan, they all opted for multi-vectored foreign policy. We had a good relation with America, with China, with Russia, with Turkey, Iran, and so forth. We are not trying to limit ourselves to particular, so it wasn't, we have no strategic vision of building this or that kind. We are just respond, we see the growing and opportunities which we can see in this particular moment, trying to use of that. And this is how most of the countries work. And certainly we also, now also another problem is with Russia, because Russia's importance is weakening. Russia's influence is shrinking, but at the same time, there is no other big power which can replace, even to come close to Russia's influence. So Russia's influence is shrinking, but still very, very strong, you know. And this is a reality we used to work. And also another, we can see that especially during the last 5 years, I can see that most of the central republics become more pragmatic, more leaning toward the cooperation with their neighbors, solving the problem related to this or that issue. Because it was in the beginning, everyone was claiming that they had a great history, they had and they wanted the rest of the world, like in particular them, not their neighbors. You know, they like was in the case with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, for example. Karimov always used to say, "Do you like Tajikistan?" Second, Afghanistan, indeed. You know, this kind of vision was that let's forget about Tajikistan is another Tajik, and let's bring all this interest, Western including to Uzbekistan as a future. You know, this kind of vision. Well, thanks God to new president of Uzbekistan, the situation is changing, and we understand that with these, you know, especially, and my vision is that that the cooperation should be enhanced, between between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Because even though Tajikistan is not Turkic Republic, but culture is very close.
Similar, yes.
You know, Uzbekistan much closer to Tajikistan than to Kazakhstan culturally.
Yes.
You know, and not to mention there are a lot of people live in, I mean, Tajiks. There are a lot of Irredenta in, you know, in Samarkand and Bukhara, and if you look around Tajikistan, every Tajik city, you can find Uzbek villages and so forth. You know, that's why we live shoulder by shoulder.
Yes.
In many cases, we live in a particular place, we share a lot of things in common, you know, sedentary people of Central Asia. That's why, I mean, not political unification, not bringing, but removing border restrictions, you know, kind of very, very important. And I see that people, the government of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan move in this direction, and at the same time, certainly everyone wants to be independent. They they have national agenda, national economy, national interest, and sometimes the national interest, national economy coincides with the interest of greater integration. We understand this. So during the civil war in Tajikistan, it was very interesting that even Islamic opposition fighting the secular government in Tajikistan, everyone respected or asked for Russia to be arbiter, to to come and pacify them, even though these guys were Islamists because of the fundamentalism and so forth. So we still had at that time okay, Russia is a great country. They should come and solve our problems. We are sometimes little by little getting rid of them, partly because Russia is preoccupied with local problems. They have a lot of problems, and they're weakening. And we coming to conclusion that we should rely on our resources. We should rely on the good relations with our neighbors, and to somehow to survive and move further.
And there are issues like water in the future will be very important thing. So that needs a incorporation between the Central Asian republics. So other issues.
This issue was exactly during Karimov period, because we believe that the issue cannot be solved because Uzbekistan is very angry with the Tajikistan because they say the upper stream got it. But nonetheless, Mirziyoyev and Rahmonov, and they ignore. They say, okay, this technical problem, we can solve this problem with water. It's technical problem. It's not political problem. It's economic problem. We can come. We can bring scholars. They could provide us with the option, and we will go with this. So this kind of politics, which we use political pattern, and the leaders come, not the institution, but leaders come, say salam alaikum, la la la, and started talk, and they decide this problem. And this economic problem, particular economic problem, they are of secondary importance. The most important is on a private level, on an interpersonal level. This is how politics works in Central Asia.
Yes. You know, once I attended a conference in Germany, and that various scholars from Uzbekistan and Tajikistan also participated. We discussed a lake. I forgot that it is starting with S. There is a lake on very high mountain in Tajikistan. Yes. If that floods, it will occupy the territory of Uzbekistan too. So that was one of the major things we discussed.
And again, this Sarez issue was used in political, reasons. So, look at the Tajiks; they are unable, they are not, qualified to solve this problem. We should come and to interfere. This kind of the politicization of the issue. A lot of noise was made on this issue.
That's right.
Certainly, it should be solved, but again, technically, without political, involvement.
So we in future
we have a lot of problems.
Yes, a lot of things. But I hope we maybe take the European Union, other things, how they sometimes try to solve their problems with negotiations. So we have to learn those patterns by time. So thank you very much. It was, I think, interesting talk with you. We discussed various issues and about Central Asia. And so my last thing is now I will let you free with our audience who are watching us on YouTube and who will be in future will be watching, many hundreds of the watchers. So what would you like to say in your a few words to our listeners?
Yeah, I'm very thankful. During the last my especially trips, even to Turkey, we met together in Turkey. When I had a lot of trips to America, to other countries, and certainly, certainly there was sometimes politics involved in our meetings. But again, if you look to the history of the Central Asia, you can see that Central Asia was the place of great scholars.
Yes, that's right.
And these great scholars, they were always driven by the curiosity, by academic interest, and they used to move from Herat to Samarkand to Baghdad to Delhi, depending on the situation. That's why I believe that we should continue our effort to see to trace our history, to write about, to please our academic interest, to write our writings exactly stemming from the academic interest of mutual importance, to find common things which we can come together and talk about them. This is my greatest wish and hope that we will continue our cooperation for the mutual benefit. And I hope that we will continue this.
Very good. Thank you very much. I will also like to thank you when I visited Tajikistan, Dushanbe.
You're welcome.
And you was a very good host. You helped me a lot. You showed me the Rudeki Park, where my father had a fight with the Russian garrison. So those things and your hospitality, I don't forget that you provided me that I was able to travel in Tajikistan. So
you're always welcome. I hope you will come.
Thank you. I will also visit you. But
travel
now,
together.
time of pandemia, we have this kind of meeting. So I think it will be useful for you. And lastly, I thank you very much, Professor Kamol Abdullaev, for very good insight about the history and the present day and the future of Central Asia. So I hope in the future we will have more talks. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now I will hold on, stay there.